All right, everyone, welcome to the Ready.Set.Lead podcast with your host, Sharon Ruiz, and me, Alex Lavin. So, for the listeners who probably don't know who we are, because this is our first episode, probably need to introduce ourselves. Sharon and I are both regional managers at an organization called Better Health Group / VIP Care. And we're an organization that's based in Florida. We specialize in primary care or family medicine for seniors. And Sharon and I are both regional managers. We manage a territory of multiple clinics, and we're also people leaders, and we both manage managers. So you want to talk about how we got the idea for doing this podcast?
Yeah, so one day I get a random text from Alex and says, "Hey, I think we're going to do a podcast." Okay, cool. We'll talk about it more on Monday. No problem. So what I want to ask is, what came to mind when you wanted to do this podcast?
Yeah, probably just another one of my crazy ideas. And just to clarify, I think this is actually like Saturday or maybe even Sunday, like 7:00 in the morning. So you're probably like out there with your kids, and I'm out there, thinking about how we can do a podcast. But yeah, I think what really came to mind is that, you and I have worked together now for, gosh, almost 3 years. Almost 3 years, pretty closely. And we've had some really great conversations about leadership and, different leadership challenges that we've been in. And, we've had some really, really good conversations. I feel like we've been able to solve a lot of challenges within our teams, within the providers, that we have in our territory. And I thought that, we should capture some of that. And, both you and I are both avid podcast listeners. I love Jocko podcast. What's the name of the podcast you're listening to?
Rebecca Minkoff.
Okay.
She's a designer.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I wanted to be cool, and I want to be like Jocko. I actually kind of feel like Jocko right now a little bit. Are you feeling like Jamie Cochran?
Yeah.
Right now?
She's awesome.
She's legit, right?
She's my idol.
I know. She's pretty legit. So yeah, that's how we got the idea to start this podcast. And I was thinking about it. I think there's like over 1 million podcasts, so the chances of anyone actually listening to this are probably pretty slim. But I was telling you earlier off air that even if nobody does listen to this, at least me and you are talking about these things, and at least me and you will get better. But I think we've got in our organization, we've got a bunch of young leaders who are hungry to learn and get better. They're incredibly motivated, and I think sharing some of this can add a lot of value.
Yeah, especially for those first time managers out there who are just getting into the work field.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And as we were brainstorming topics, I think we were thinking about what's the first topic we could talk about. And something that's come up, within our team is imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. And so for the listeners, for those of you who have never heard of this concept, I want to read the definition of what imposter syndrome is. So imposter syndrome is also known as a phenomenon or imposterism, which is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their own accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud despite external evidence of their competence, skills, and achievements. People experiencing imposter syndrome often attribute their successes to luck, timing, or external factors rather than their own capabilities. they may feel that they are undeserving of their achievements and that they will eventually be discovered as imposters. Sharon Ruiz, what do you think about imposter syndrome? This is something we kind of hear a lot with our first time managers. I know we'll get into your story here in a little bit because I know this is something that you've struggled with. Any thoughts?
Yeah, like you said, I've struggled with that in pretty much any role I've taken on. And as I've listened to podcasts myself, all I hear is fake it till you make it. Nobody really knows what you don't know. And you pretty much learn as you go. And you have those experiences from your prior employees and prior employment. So we just have to take that and run with it. And one day you will make it. You just have to be very confident in yourself, and that comes along later on. It's not something that you just jump into unless you're cocky or something like that and you're like, "Oh, I've got this." But from the very beginning, I feel if you're very humble, it's something that you'll just deal with and hopefully one day overcome it.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I think one thing that you said that's really powerful is that this can happen to anybody. So a couple real life examples that I think that we see is with medical doctors. I think society idolizes the physician, and being a medical doctor, you go to school for, I don't know, what, 15 plus years, depending on what type of specialty you do. And so I think people think that they have this all figured out. And that's actually not the case. And so, medical doctors can be a skilled or experienced doctor, and they can still feel unworthy of praise from patients or their fellow physicians. And they can also believe that any success that they've achieved is due to somebody else's guidance, or they haven't worked hard enough, and they don't have the actual ability to be successful as a physician. And I think within our industry, being a confident physician is incredibly important, because we're all about preventative medicine and doing as much for we can for the patient in the office, and you've got to be very confident in your clinical skills. Otherwise, you're going to be referring people out or sending them to the ER. And so sometimes we see that with our medical doctors. They lack some of that clinical confidence. So that can definitely be a struggle. Another big one is with executive leaders. It's a high pressure position. High ranking executives can feel like they're out of their depth in their leadership role. And even despite the decisions that they make that may benefit the company, they potentially will attribute those successes to maybe the team around them, or for external factors in the industry or the economy, and they may struggle with confidence too and be dealing with imposter syndrome. And I think this last one, this is really the one that affects us the most, and that we see most common, and probably is the most common, and that's the new manager, which is somebody who's been newly promoted and constantly doubts their abilities, decisions, and feeling like they don't deserve the position. That's tough. And despite their qualifications and past achievements, they believe that they're not as capable as their peers, and at any moment they could be exposed as being incompetent or being found out, right? That they're truly an imposter and not a fit for the position. So, speaking of new managers, Sharon Ruiz, congratulations. You were just recently promoted from assistant regional manager to now a regional manager. A pretty big jump. But you've also had a pretty long career progression. And I know that throughout these different jumps in your career, you felt some of that imposter syndrome. So tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yes, for sure. So for those of you who are in the medical field, right? I've started out as a medical assistant. I've been in the field for almost 20 years, and it's been a long run. And for the first 10 years of that career, I was, to me, just a medical assistant, but I knew that I could be more. And I've had a lot of pretty bad managers, maybe, and I wonder sometimes, why are you even in a management field? That just didn't make any sense to me sometimes. But with that, it's been a challenge. And as I progressed throughout my career, I've worked at the front desk, I was medical assistant, then I was like MA lead, then supervisor. Then I came to VIP care, given the opportunity by you, Alex, right, as to become an office manager. And I was like, man, I've made it. This is what I have, and I showed everything that I had. And 2 years later, I got promoted to assistant regional. And from the transition from supervisor, right, that I was, and I wasn't in that role for very long, to then being an office manager, I was really dealing with that imposter syndrome. And it was very difficult in the beginning. And we've had many conversations about that. And I would sit in my desk sometimes and I would be like, man, am I even supposed to be here? And it was just so many challenges that I just didn't know how to deal with. Where now I look back at it, and it's been almost 3 years since I've been here. And I was like, wow, I overcame so many things that now today I look at it, I'm like, oh, I was dumb, right? I was like, why am I thinking that I don't belong here? I worked so hard to get here. And 2 years later, after coming to VIP care, I got promoted to assistant regional. I feel like that's when I really, really hit that imposter syndrome, because I was now with executive leaders. And it was a totally different transition from office manager, where I was just dealing with, my team, and I had 7 people at the time and then 2 providers. So then coming into executive leadership, that really took a toll. And we would talk about that all the time, but I would walk into a room and I didn't know how to feel. It was kind of like, do I belong here? And I would always talk about our VP of operations and how she just comes into a room and like you could tell she has that confidence. Now, whether she does or not, I don't know, right? Because we can easily fake it, right? And so I started to kind of take some leadership from that aspect as well. And I kind of now do the same thing, but I feel more confident in my role. And then coming into the regional manager position, it wasn't a big jump, let's say, right? Because I was already kind of, let's say, a baby RM, a baby regional manager, kind of working to that role, to the regional manager officially. But so I was kind of preparing for that next step. So that's why I feel like assistant regional manager really helped me to prepare me for the next step, where now I do feel confident. I do feel still imposter syndrome to a very minimal degree, but it's still there because now it is fully my responsibility. Whereas before I was under your name, everything was Alex Lavin. Yeah, it was like the CC, right? But it wasn't technically mine. And now that it is, that really, at first it didn't hit me, but then a few weeks into the job, it's like, man, I'm doing all these official name changes and all of that. Now it's like, wow, it's really going to be just under me. So now I have to answer officially to absolutely everything. I mean, I did have to do that prior, but now it's just really me. And I'm on a standalone island in a sense, right? Now it's just Sharon Ruiz, not Alex Lavin. So it really, really hits you at that point. But I'm still kind of going through that stage. But it's getting a little bit better as I move on into the role and just getting that confidence back.
What do you think? So when you went from office manager to assistant regional manager, I think one thing that we talked about a lot was that fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when you first got into that role, like you would sort of like, don't look over here, like try to clean stuff up and like, don't look at me, like I'm Miss Perfect. We talked a lot about, perfection and like being okay it's okay to make mistakes and to embrace failures as a learning opportunity. What was that like for you? Because I know you're sort of a perfectionist at heart, and I know that was sort of hard for you to let that go and embrace like mistakes.
Yeah, it was extremely difficult because from childhood I was always taught things had to be a certain way, things had to be perfect. So I kind of grew up with that. And it just kind of rolled over into my career. So everything had to be a certain way. If I did labs in the lab as an MA, my stuff was set up to my like perfection, right? Quote unquote. And coming into the office manager role, I quickly learned that perfection is not a thing. It's a very big misconception and something that I really, really struggled with. Because even with my spreadsheets and everything like that, everything was color coded, everything was in a certain spot, and I had my notes and things like that. And when you would put me on the spot, I was like, well, no, this is what I have, right? So um, it took some getting used to not being perfect per se, but accepting the mistakes and not only accepting it, but owning the mistake, which is something that we've recently really talked about more about, because not only is nothing is ever perfect, right? But you also have to own those failures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most important part. And not only owning them, but making sure you don't repeat them. That's how you know that you're really learning from your failures or your mistakes and just improving in the future.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's huge. Having that ownership mindset. For me, and I want to know what you think about this, but I think that when you were first getting exposed to extreme ownership, and I think we hear that growing up, but when you start practicing it in the workplace, it can be different, and I think it can be scary in the beginning, because I think for you, it was, from my observation, I want to know what your opinion is, but from my observation, I think it was for you was sort of letting go of that perfectionism, and you were actually having to accept that you were making mistakes. And I think before, yeah, maybe you were making mistakes, but you're trying to keep them on the low and like maintain that aura of perfectionism. So I know that was sort of hard to, I don't ever think you had a victim mentality, but I think for you being exposed to the show, I think it was the transition for you was letting go of having to be perfect and really feeling okay to take that ownership. But you've really embraced the ownership mindset. What do you think about that? What do you think about that ownership mindset and sort of being somebody who wasn't, you certainly weren't a victim. You weren't somebody that was blaming others, but like I said, you were that person who wanted to maintain that reputation of perfection, and so taking ownership kind of went against that initial reputation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think as you grow in any career, taking that ownership, especially as being a manager, you have to take ownership for everybody else's mistakes, because that really goes on how your leadership is and how good it is. And it's okay too to let your teams know that you're going to fail, you're going to make mistakes. He's very good at sharing the times where I was like, oh, everything was perfect, I never made mistakes. And I think maybe I did have some kind of a victim mentality, maybe to a very minimal degree. But as we've been talking more about extreme ownership, that has really gone out the window. And now I'm like, man, I am responsible for 100% of what my team is doing. And that is why I'm like an investigator sometimes. I have to dig up whatever I need to dig up. And I don't do that to throw it at my team and say, oh, you're doing this wrong. I do that because, like you said, people maybe try to hide mistakes and think that I'm not going to find. But I don't want to be surprised later on with like, well, your team is doing this and doing that and you don't know about it, So I try to keep up as much as I can with what my team is doing. But, and we talk a lot about extreme ownership with them as well. So that's very, very important to show to your team that not only are you taking extreme ownership, but you're also letting them know like, hey, I expect you as well to make sure that your team members are doing what they need to be doing. And when you're delegating something, make sure to follow up on it. When you're giving them something specific, make sure to follow up on it. And make sure when your team is lying to you, because I can very, very well know when somebody's lying to me on my team, right? And that comes from doing those one-on-ones with them and things like that. But taking extreme ownership is really, really important, and nothing is ever perfect.
Yeah.
Something that I quickly learned being an office manager. So, and that's a mistake on me, but two, it's that's kind of the society we lived in. I feel like extreme ownership is being talked about more now than it ever has been, really.
Yep.
And that's good to see, because it's something that I teach my own kids. I have 2 small girls, and it's a rough world out there, and you're going to make mistakes, but you want to make sure that you're learning from them and not repeating them.
Yeah, I think that for me personally, taking ownership over a situation is like liberating.
Yes.
Because it's very liberating to, well, it's 2 things. One, it can be a little scary, and it's humbling because it's like, okay, I'm responsible for everything in my world, especially in the business world. You're going to be responsible for your team. You're going to be responsible for their actions. You're going to be responsible for the results that come from your team. And I know one thing that we always talked about is the higher you ascend in leadership, the more responsible you become with less control. And so that has to deal with being a good manager, good leader. But I also think that it's humbling, but it's also liberating at the same time, because even though it's scary, you're responsible for all these things. When you take ownership, now you get to own the solution. You get to decide how you're going to react. You get to decide what the next move is you're going to make. You're going to get to decide the ultimate outcome. And so when I framed it that way, it became incredibly easy for me to adopt. And I think you kind of took it on in a similar way like that too. So bringing it back to imposter syndrome, Sharon, what would you say to a new manager who might be feeling like that right now? They may have been recently promoted, and you've got somebody on your team who was just recently promoted. She was an MA. She's a manager now, so maybe she's sort of feeling like that. What would you say to a new manager? How would you coach them through imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so I would just let them know, you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect the first time around. But as long as you learn from what your mistakes are, just move forward from there. And imposter syndrome at some point or another will go away the more you're doing the job and the more you're training your own team and speaking to your own providers and coming up with action plans and solutions to issues that are happening and getting more confident. You just have to find that confidence level. And again, if you have to fake it till you make it, that's just what you have to do. But I'm usually there to coach them through situations, and I do put them to the test too. So they'll come to me with a situation, and I'll ask them, "Okay, that's fine, but what would you do about it? What are you going to do?" And I'll have them explain their plan to me. And if it sounds great, all right, so that's what you're going to do. So go do it. Right. And that kind of gives them a bigger confidence level where they don't feel like they have to come to me with every little situation that happens in the clinic. And that to them, I've heard numerous times from my team that it's something that they appreciate because they've never really had a manager to put them to the test. And that I've never had a manager until you that put me to the test and actually made me put my thinking cap on and be like, okay, this is my clinic. What are we going to do to fix what we need to fix? So coming from an office manager, then to assistant, now regional, I've been able to better coach my team because I've been in the positions where they have been. So I feel like my messaging to them might be a little bit different because I understand. I know the struggles, I know the challenges and the excuses that I once gave that are really not an excuse. But I was able to figure out solutions to the problems and get what am I looking for? Like get the right outcome for that situation. So, and it's a slow progression. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We're just going to have to work through, and some may take longer than others. But it just comes with time.
So proud.
Thank you.
So proud of you. No, you've done a great job. And last question I want to ask you before we go to our final segment here. We got segments. We're a legit podcast now. But the last question I want to ask you is, because I think this is what managers, office managers who aspire to be an assistant regional or regional manager, I think there's two big jumps that they have to make, and two concepts that they have to understand. I think number one is it's much different from managing one site to now going to multi-site management, right? We spoke a lot about that, right? And I think the big thing is you can't be in one location, or you can't be in multiple locations at the same time, right? And that's a big difference from when you're an office manager. You're physically on site and you have eyes on your team all the time. So the way you're managing and your techniques are completely different. So I think that's one big thing. I want to hear your perspective on that. And then two is I really want to know what it was like for you when you went from an office manager. So you're managing front desk and you're managing medical assistants, individual contributors as an office manager. And then you made the jump to assistant regional, and now you're managing managers. What was that like? What was your mindset shift?
So that transition was difficult, I would say, because coming from one site management, you just have 7 people on your team, and now going from 7 to almost 30, it was a big jump. And it was kind of like a smooth transition, right? Because I still had to find my replacement and things like that. But now having 7 clinics and about 30 team members with those 7 clinics, it's now I'm focusing on the manager themselves versus the whole team, and I don't currently have an office without an office manager, but obviously if I did, I would still make myself available, right, to the team there, because they have nobody to report to at the time but me. And I always told them too, your provider is another one of your team members. If they're having to come to me with concerns, then they weren't doing their job. I know that they would be doing their job if I don't hear from the providers at all. Not that I don't want to hear from them, I love hearing from my providers, but never really with a complaint or a concern. So I think working through my office managers has been a challenge, because it's difficult when you don't actually have full control over a clinic. You lose all control. You don't have access to every single team member. And there are times where, I'm sure you're going through this now, where you don't know everybody who's at a clinic, right? Because they're the ones hiring now for clinical team members versus how we were doing it before. So it's a challenge, but I always make myself available to every single one of them. And they appreciate it, even though I'm not there once a week like I want to, because now I have to kind of split my time 7 ways. I do make sure that I'm sending messages in the morning, making sure that they're okay. We have group chats, things like that. And I'm in constant communication with all of my team, my office managers. And they always know, even on weekends, they can call me, text message me, whatever, even if it's just a private conversation that they need to have. But always having that open door policy, let's say, even if it's just virtually, it's really, really good for them.
Yeah, for sure. I think you said a lot of spot on things. I think one of the biggest differences for me, and I know we've talked a lot about this, is really understanding that the office manager is your most valuable, most important team member on your team. And I mean, that's why we've got our team name. We call ourselves the Heartbeats. We've got the shirts on right now as we're recording this. And the reason we call ourselves the Heartbeats is because we believe that the office manager is the heart of the clinic. And they're the ones that are controlling the pulse. They're controlling the rhythm. They're keeping their patients on flow. They're keeping their doctor on time. They're running the morning huddles. They're the ones that are meeting with the support teams. They're really your eyes and ears. And so, I think the big difference for me, and something that I had to learn very quickly, when I first became a regional manager is that you have to pour into your office manager and really make them the best they can be. Because when you have a really great manager or leader underneath you, man, that makes all the difference in the world. They can move mountains.
Right.
And it's huge. So yeah, imposter syndrome, definitely a hard thing to overcome. So let's go to our final segment here. And this is, how can we beat imposter syndrome? And I think this is something that we talk to our managers quite frequently about, especially if they're new. And so we've got a couple tips here. I think the first one, and this is really why we wanted to do this podcast, is number one is to recognize and acknowledge that imposter syndrome exists, and to understand that we are in this thing called the confidence gap, which is the disparity between our actual capabilities and the perception of our capabilities. And I think what's most important to acknowledge here is that our perceptions are probably not the most accurate. I know there's been a lot of times where, whether you've admitted or not, I know you've doubted yourself. And I know, I've been hard on you from time to time, but I know I've also, pushed you and been intentional around, pointing out the things that you are doing well, and because maybe your perception is, man, I'm not fit for this role. I bit off more than I can chew. I think it's on us as the leaders to help our managers and teams understand that, no, we picked you for a reason. You may be struggling right now, but you certainly have what it takes to move through. So I think we can, as leaders, help reshape our team's perception of themselves and help restore some of their self-confidence. So I think the number one thing that we do is we got to recognize and acknowledge that, number one, hey, this is a thing and it's normal. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think too with that, it's letting them know that, it's a balance, right? So letting them know that that yes, you made mistakes, but these are your strengths as well. Because if we just continue to point out mistake after mistake after mistake, and then nothing really positive, they're like, man, am I doing anything right? Am I really fit for this position? Am I supposed to be here? Because then their imposter syndrome is not really imposter syndrome. And then they're like really in that negative mindset. So I think that doing that, the hamburger, right? Positive, negative, positive, it's a good thing, because you always want them to continue to thrive, and not, we're going to bring them down for a split second, but at the same time, we want to make sure that their confidence is just not blown to the ground, right? So keep them up there.
Is that really called the hamburger? I've
Yeah.
always heard it called the sandwich effect. That's
Was
pretty.
it the sandwich?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think I kind of like hamburger though. That's pretty legit. I think I'm gonna get a hamburger
but
after this.
It was a sandwich effect, I guess. But
like
I heard somebody
though.
say hamburger. Who, I don't know. It was I think might have been one of our office managers say that. But and the guy's like stuck with me. I was like, okay, but just give him something positive as well in the negative, right? Because we also want to make sure, let's say we have to give corrective action, that we're not surprising them. And we kind of talked about this today, where it's like, man, I didn't know I was doing this bad because you didn't tell me, right? So we want to make sure that you're always giving them that positive direction as well as the negative feedback, or that constructive feedback, because you want to make sure that they understand where they're lacking, and that with our help, we can get them better.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the number two thing to beat imposter syndrome, and we've already spoke a lot about this so far today, is we want to normalize mistakes and learning. And I think that this is huge. It's really on us as leaders to set the tone that mistakes are okay, and that they're really a learning opportunity. And I think that we as leaders need to create a culture of safety. And I don't know about you, but what I've found to be and I feel like I do this really well with our internal team. So me, you, our office managers, I feel like I do a good job of this. I don't feel like I do a good job of this with our peers, so our fellow regional managers. And I'll say what it is right now is I think in order to create a culture of safety, you've got to be vulnerable yourself as a leader.
Right.
And so I think to make it safe for your team to make mistakes, I think it's important for us as leaders to talk about the mistakes that we've made. And you've done that. You said that earlier, that you do that with your managers and say, hey, I made some of these excuses, I made some of these mistakes, so I kind of know what you're going through. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree, because if you don't make yourself vulnerable, it's like we're like robots, and we want to let them know that yes, it's okay to make the mistake, and I've made them as well. And a lot of for example, my office managers, most of them are moms as well. So being a working mom is hard, especially if you have 2 or more kids. It's really, really difficult. So there's times where, one kid gets sick and the other one just falls right after the other. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to not be in the office today. And it's like, I understand, but you're doing a great job already in your clinic. So it's okay, as long as you're doing a good job. We have to be multitaskers as parents. But yeah, I think just normalizing that it's okay to be a working mom, that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's okay to be imperfect. That's just a misconception from the reality of it.
Yeah, and I'm going to go a side note here really quick about being a working mom. I want to give you a shout out, Sharon, because that's something, having that perspective. So I'm a dad. I've got 2 kids. You're a mom. You've got 2 kids, 2 lovely daughters. And, we're both married, right? So we're not single parents.
Right.
But certainly shout out to my wife, Maureen. She's a hero. She handles the household and the kids. And I think me seeing that, but really most importantly, Sharon, working with you, because I know there was times where even as your office manager days, you had to miss some time, especially during like the COVID years, with kids missing school and stuff. And I remember I would get frustrated.
Yeah.
And that's because I didn't understand. And I think you really watching you and watching you persevere through those times has really made me a better leader, because you help me gain a different perspective. And it's like, because I'm a guy that's like, oh, we got to go hard and stuff like that, but that's not really the best, especially because what you said, a lot of our team, former medical assistants, predominantly female, a lot of moms, we've got to be very supportive, we got to be very cognizant of that and support our team. So shout out to you. You've definitely helped me gain a really great perspective on working with women in general, and certainly working with moms, and it's different.
Yeah.
It's different for moms, right?
Yeah. And as being in the medical field, it is a women industry in a sense, right? When it comes to the clinical team. So a lot of moms are single, and shout out to them, right? Because it's a hard job being a mom, being not having that partner with you, and then having to work an 8 to 5 job, and then trying to make a career out of it, so it is difficult. I've had many nights where I've had to work from home, and as I'm putting my kids to sleep, things like that. And I feel like some of our office managers do the same, because I sometimes get messages at 7, 8 o'clock at night. It's like, what are you doing up? What are you doing working? But it's just sometimes what we have to do as working parents. So yeah, I feel blessed. I have my husband, and like you said, it was a tough time as an office manager, because there were times I was like, oh my God, I would go home. I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm going to get fired today, because I've been calling out so much because my kids are sick. And at that time, I didn't have anybody to really take care of them while I needed to go work. But at any other employment, I probably would have been gone, but I'm thankful for where I'm at right now. But yeah, I'm very, very cognizant of the struggles that are out there, and I'm just there to support them. So like, I had one of my office managers just recently move, and I was like, and I know she's by herself, so I was like, listen, if you need absolutely anything, I don't care, I'll go on a Saturday and help you move, I'll take my husband with me. So, it's just what I'm willing to do for my team, and they're very well aware of that. Like, I'll go out of my way, You need food, I got you. Your kids needs diaper, you can't, I got you. And we always try to help them better themselves as well. I feel like as an organization, so that's always really, really good for working on where we are, because we're very, very supportive for our teams.
Yeah, agreed. And I think being a working mother, you've certainly developed that empathy, but you helped me develop that empathy, and I think that's been a very valuable skill for me as a leader. So that was number 2. We want to normalize our mistakes and understand that those are learning opportunities. Number 3, this is a big one. We need to own our achievements. We gotta be proud of ourselves.
Yeah, for sure.
And we've talked a lot on this podcast. We talked a lot about extreme ownership, which is awesome, but normally when we're talking about extreme ownership, we're talking about owning the failures and owning our mistakes. But when we're talking about imposter syndrome, we want to own our achievements. And we've done some things. I think we've done some things that we feel are pretty successful with our teams to do self-promotion and talk about our successes. You got any suggestions for the listener on things that they can do to highlight some of their achievements?
Yeah, for sure. We actually encourage our team members, our office managers, to open up a simple LinkedIn account. That's a good way. You're doing an event out in the community, go ahead and post it on there. Take lots of pictures. That's our thing. We do an event, take pictures. And that's not only showing that you're doing things for your community out there, but you're also showing that you're self-promoting yourself, and you want to make sure that that's something that you always do. And that's something that I had to get used to because I wasn't really used to that. And I have Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, but I never really post anything for myself. And I actually posted in a really long time the other day about my promotion. I got thousands of congrats and things like that. And that's not something that I usually do because I'm very, very private with my personal life. But that self-promotion is very important. You never know. You may leave here today and know somebody tomorrow. You never know who. That networking is always very important. And as you progress in your career, you never know what next opportunity you may get just from a simple LinkedIn account and being active on it too, because I get a lot of personal messages all the time, and it's just important to do it. So we really highly encourage it.
What do you think about the brag book? Tell us about that.
Yes. So in one of our books, couldn't remember which one it was, but we read about creating a brag book. And something that I started, and I think some of our team members started it as well. And it's really just it's a book, right? And I kind of took it up as a arts and crafts kind of thing because I'm very artsy. So I made it, and basically any type of text message, email, I don't know, pictures. I got sent edible arrangements a couple of times from other regional managers for helping them out. All that stuff, I actually put it in a book. I would cut it out, tape it. And it's basically when you're feeling down, that's a book to go to. When man, these are, people really appreciate me. People really acknowledge the hard work that I've been putting in. And when I got my promotion, there was a lot of, before I got the promotion, right? There was a lot of, you went through different departments and asked about how I was doing. And their words really, really touched me because, again, I do my job and I do it well, but I don't really recognize the impact that I'm making on other people. And that's really, really good to see. And I hope that I'm always making a positive impact because that's always what I want to do. And if you are listening and you're one of our departments, if I'm not, please let me know. But that's usually my best intent. And if I don't know a process in your department, I would be happy to learn it your way. So that way there's no mistakes being made. But that's always very positive. So the brag book is very, very important, at least to me, because it's something that I constantly look back on. Let's say if I'm having a bad day or something, or just to look back at it, it's wow, these are the progressions, because I was an office manager when we started that. So this is the progression, and now a regional manager. So I've added on all those emails recently, but it's good.
Yeah, I think the important thing with the brag book and what you're talking about is, when we first opened today, we read the definition of imposter syndrome, and it's the disparity between your actual capabilities and the perception, your own perception of your capabilities. And I think what's so powerful about the brag book is that, when we're not feeling confident, we forget about all the good stuff, the great stuff that we've done. And I know having those words can really pull you out and reframe your perspective back to the positive and restore your confidence. I got a brag book. I got a digital version right here on my Mac. I got to pull that bad boy up a couple times a week sometimes. Go back through there and read some of those. I think I got some stuff from you when you give me a little shout out, like, hey, thanks for pushing out, screenshot that, keep it, look at that for a rainy day. When I'm feeling a little down on myself. But yeah, brag book is definitely really, really powerful. This is something we were talking about today too in our book club, is talking about wins, in the small wins. And so we have a weekly all hands meeting. We call it Team Lead Grand Rounds, and essentially it's all the office managers throughout from the entire team from all regions. So there's about 100 office managers that come to that meeting, and we always open up the meeting with a section for teams to give wins. And man, that's been so awesome to hear all of our teams give wins. And I know we've had to be super intentional with pushing our teams to give wins. And man, when you see them give a win, you just see them like light up on the screen. What do you think?
Yeah, I remember when I first started at VIP Care and we were doing grand rounds. At that point, I believe we were 50 something clinics at that point. Now we're like at 124, almost 130, and nobody would say a win. It was like crickets, right? When they would ask for wins. And so we started, so Alex was starting to push us, right? You pushed us very hard. Like, hey, I need to hear a win from you guys. I need to hear a win. And it really became a thing where now we don't even have to ask our office managers to give a win. They just automatically give one. And there was a point where we were like taking over the wins, and I feel like we needed a whole grand rounds just to do wins, because it's only a 30-minute meeting, so it was like 15 minutes of wins because everybody now wants to give a win. But it's just exciting to see how we kind of took that on, and it progressed as time went on. So it's hard, and it's hard to speak up in big meetings like that, especially when you have so many people around. Because it's like, for me, I still struggle with this myself, where we may be having like a regional meeting and I don't want to speak up because of fear. And that's my own struggle, and I'm kind of trying to work through that. But
I'd be in the chat like, yo, speak up.
Speak up, this is for you. But now in grand rounds and wins, that's really, really a big one. And our office managers love giving wins. Like you said, their faces just light up. And they're excited to talk about what they did with the patient, or talk about anything, they made their admissions for the month or something like that. So it's good to see.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's good stuff. So the last one here is number 4, and we want to focus on growth, not perfection. And again, this is something you spoke a lot about. This is something that you struggled with, is you were completely focused on trying to be perfect. And, you were able to really shift your focus from trying to be perfect and going from trying to be perfect to striving for growth and improvement. Talk about that mindset shift for you.
Yeah. So going from trying to be Miss Perfect to now Miss Imperfect, it was a struggle, but as time went on, I did grow from it, and accepting my failures, but I didn't accept it as a failure. I took it as I'm growing as a leader, and that's very, very important to me, because I have seen a big shift from when I started as an office manager to now a regional manager. And, not only with my leadership, but, with my speech, the way I dress, simple things as that. I do my makeup when I go out now, things like that. And so, like I tell you all the time, right? I come to headquarters and I have to wear my heels because I'm short, right? I'm 5 feet. So it just makes me feel taller and it makes me feel more confident. So, but yeah, I feel like I have grown, and getting away from that perfect mentality is a big one, because nothing in the world is perfect. And I may say it may be OCD, but and I even try to, like, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It's okay if there's imperfections, and that's stuff that I've learned with my own office managers as we've been going through some of the challenges that they've been having, and letting them know, like, it's okay, you do it your way and I'll accept it, as long as we're just getting in that same direction, as long as we're getting to the same outcome, it's fine. You do it your own way, and they appreciate it as we're moving along. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We want to definitely embrace the learning process and the value of continuous development.
Right.
And so that's our four tips to overcome imposter syndrome. It's recognize and acknowledge imposter syndrome. We want to normalize mistakes and treat them as learning opportunities. We want to own our achievements. We want to take extreme ownership, right? We want to own our mistakes, but we certainly want to own our achievements as well. And then lastly, we want to focus on growth, not perfection. But I think there's one last hidden one here. I'm kind of going off script here, but that's okay. And I think we need to normalize imposter syndrome as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I want people to know, and I think what I've had to tell myself, is like, when we're feeling this way, it's okay.
Right.
It's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with you. This is 100% normal. And this is part of being a human. This is part of the human experience.
Yes.
And
part of your growth.
It's part of your growth. And, I think if we're not feeling imposter syndrome, I actually struggle with this quite a bit. There's actually a duality to imposter syndrome. It's actually something called, I was reading about this, I'll throw this in here. It's called overconfidence bias.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I definitely struggle for this, because when I wake up in the morning, I'd be like, we're taking over the world today.
Yeah.
We're taking all the clinics. We're taking over all the we're taking over everything, and I'll take all the projects, give them to me. I got it. I can take anything. So I think I definitely have struggled from imposter syndrome, but I think I overcompensate sometimes for that, and I can be overconfident.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly not a good way to be, because obviously you lack humility, right? And life has a funny way of, when you lack humility, life is going to humble you.
Yes.
It's going to humble you.
Yep.
So have you ever felt overconfident?
I think as my medical assistant days, I kind of did feel that like that at some point. I thought I was the thing, that was it, the MA was me, and I feel like that backfired, like you said, a little bit with life, just because that was some feedback that I actually received from like a new MA or one of my previous jobs. And I was like, wow, that was like a punch in the face, like I never really thought that I could get to that point. But I was just good at what I did. So ever since then, I was really, really humble, and was like, well, let's not make that same mistake again, because it's great for you to know your job, but at the same time, not be overconfident, because that's when mistakes start to happen. So it's a balance that you have to have sometimes. So, and it's okay to have imposter syndrome. It's not disability or anything, you're not going through a psychological issue or anything. It's just how you're feeling at the time, and that's fine. Every position that you ever get in any employment, you'll probably feel some extent of that until you're confident and comfortable in your job. And it's okay to be taken out of your comfort zone, because that is how you grow as a leader.
Yeah, for sure. Now that I think about it, I recently experienced imposter syndrome. You know, we've been very fortunate here on our team that we've been able to expand nationally, and I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to help stand up our market in Dallas Fort Worth, Texas. I got to collaborate on hiring a physician out there, get to hire a regional manager, and get to train up and work with that regional manager. But it was a different business model. We did an acquisition out there that was all fee for service, which is different from our business model here when we do full risk Medicare Advantage. I was way outside of my comfort zone, and there were some nights there I was like, man, I don't know if I have what it takes to handle this. But I think another thing to know too is that we've got a lot of support around us. My leader was there to support me through that, and I think I definitely want our OMs to feel that you're number one in the clinic, but you're not alone in the clinic. And so, yeah. Well, I think that's all we've got today.
It.
Man, we're like pretty legit. I feel like this was a good episode.
This was a good conversation.
Probably no one's going to listen to it, but that's all good. Well, all right. So I think we're going to do our best to release episodes bi-weekly.
That's for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening. On to the next.